So we are in week 5 of a series called Peculiar People, and it's all about the weird ways we're called to walk with Jesus while living in our world. And when we look at the book of 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, the author says, "You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people." So when others in the world around you see your life, does it make them think that you are peculiar? Do they wonder what's different about you? And so we started in an unexpected place, looking at AI, and we explored what it would look like if we were to be wise like serpents and gentle like doves in our approach, and how our interaction with it might differ from the world. We then looked at the life of Mary, a woman of so many one-offs. A struggle can sometimes feel so unique that it's unrelatable. So rather than emulate her life, we looked at how we can look at our own one-offs and our struggles that are peculiar to us in a way that honors God like she did. We then looked at the account in John's Gospel of the royal official who took a faith walk that others may perceive as weird or peculiar. And we asked if walking in faith on what Jesus said might be the miracle that we got to see. And then finally last week, we looked at the life and conversion of the Apostle Paul, and we considered what would change in our spiritual gait if we chose to walk with others the way Jesus did, driven by love over dogmatic adherence to the law. And now we've come to week 5. The pause felt weird, eh? Like, why is he just standing there doing nothing? Did he lose his notes? Because hustle's so ingrained in our psyche. A lack of activity feels like more than a waste. It feels immoral. Rest is so separated from our everyday experience that it feels awkward and out of place. The regular rhythms of our life leaves very little room for rest. But if we as God's chosen people are to walk with Jesus while living in our world, we need to walk in step with his rhythms. And so this morning we're going to explore Jesus' redemptive rhythms of rest. There's a study that was done in Germany on 5,979 full-time employees, and it found that up to 29% of workers frequently skipped lunch, and 16% would have their lunch breaks interrupted. The number goes up to 36% when you're looking at leadership in those companies. This despite the fact that in Germany these breaks are mandatory. In another workplace experiment that by the Harvard Business Review magazine conducted over 4 years at the North American offices of Boston Consulting Group, they found that it was actually possible for consultants and their professionals to meet the highest professional standards of service and still have planned uninterrupted time off. However, they found it so difficult to get people to take that time. As one participant put it, forcing a full day off was like tying your right hand behind your back to teach you how to use your left hand. And it's not just the workplace. This is a quote from a relatively small study of 111 students in India. The results of this study show a high prevalence of hustle culture among high school students. Around 64% of the students are in agreement with the statement such that they have no leisure time because of multiple activities, and they feel guilty to take long breaks. So why do we find it so hard to rest? The natural flow of our culture leads to a world where rest is exclusive. And in South Africa specifically, it's even more ironic that at the moment, unemployment sits at 33.2%. So you're either thirsting for work or you're drowning in it. But so few experience rest. Is this how God meant for it to be? Or is there a different rhythm he had in mind? Now, the problem isn't work itself. Work is a pre-fall construction. And what I mean by that is, before there was ever sin, there was work. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." After creating human beings, God blesses them and then gives them the work of subduing and having dominion over the earth. And then in Genesis 2 verse 19, he gives Adam the work of naming every living creature. So I wonder if God, after creating the entire universe, inventing the concept of light, does he just run out of creativity? And all of a sudden, he needs Adam's input? Of course not. Whenever Matthew, my brother, when he plays keyboard at home with his daughter Sophia, she always wants to play whenever he's at the piano. And we actually have a video of it here. Now, as cute as she is, I don't think Matthew needs her assistance to make music. But when Matthew and Sophia play piano together, it's got nothing to do with music production. But it's got everything to do with relational connection. When he sits beside her, his thoughts are not entertain me, compose for me. His thoughts are be with me, walk with me, do as I do. And this was God's design for our work, that we would be with him and walk with him and do as he does. And so interestingly, rest is also introduced here right at the beginning. God models a rhythm of rest for us. On the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. God models a pattern of refreshment after work has finished. And rest is also instituted as a time for God to be with his creation. And so we see that in work and in rest, God desires to be with his people. But before long, sin did enter the picture. And as a result of the sin of Adam and Eve, God pronounced this curse on the land. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So now, work is no longer about being with God and walking with him and doing as he does. Work is about survival, and work is hard. And not only is it that by the sweat of our brow that we produce bread, but now the ground produces thorns. Because sometimes you can put all your effort into a business that fails. And sometimes 100 job applications go unanswered. Because sometimes the ground produces thorns. And the curse isn't the work itself. It's what that work has become for us as a result of sin. And in the same way, rest has been distorted. We can't just rest for refreshment or to be with God. We need to rest for recovery. We need to rest so that I can get back into the rhythm of my sin-stained work again. But God plants the seeds of salvation right here at the roots of sin. Just as he had a plan for the redemption of our souls, God had a plan for the redemption of his original plan of work and rest. So to his chosen people, Israel, after they are rescued from Egypt, God introduces them to a taste of this rhythm. And he does this by giving them the Sabbath. In Exodus 16, we read that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. You may have heard of the Sabbath from the Ten Commandments, and I like to call it the middle child of the Ten Commandments because it's the fourth one. And we just sort of leave it there. We ignore it. Right? It's one of those ones where it's like, oh, that's weird. We treat it as a secondary command. But it actually predates the commandments. The commandments only appear in Exodus 20. So what is it? The Sabbath was a day for everyone where everyone ceased work. And it's patterned after God's example in creation, where he would work for 6 days and on the seventh day rest from all work. And it's something that God took very seriously. And we see that in one of those uncomfortable stories in the Old Testament, where in Numbers chapter 15, a man is sentenced to death for picking up sticks on a Sabbath day. And in Ezekiel 20 verse 12, God calls the Sabbath a sign between him and Israel that he sanctifies them. In other words, the Sabbath was a sign that he set them apart and made them his own. It says, moreover, I gave them the Sabbath as a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. How strange is it that one of the peculiarities of Israel was to be that they would be a people of rest. A pattern of rest was to be in the DNA of God's people. Now you may have noticed here that the plural form is used of Sabbath, Sabbaths. And that's because besides the Sabbath every 7 days. Okay, so I'm going to read this. Besides the Sabbath every 7 days, there was also 7 more high Sabbaths every year, and then a Sabbath every year, then a Sabbath year every 7th year, and then after 7 Sabbath years, each with 7 yearly Sabbaths, plus the once every 7th day Sabbath, you finally had a special Sabbath called the Jubilee, where all the debts were forgiven, slaves were set free, and the lost restored to their families who had lost them. Lost land restored to their families. If you're feeling a bit confused, that is fantastic, because then we're on the same page. Okay. The nation was structured around these rhythms of Sabbath, though. And there's a lot of deep symbolism in the cycles of these Sabbaths, but ultimately it goes back to God's original design. The Sabbaths were an opportunity to get away from our sin-distorted work life, and reconnect with our Creator. It was for us to be with Him and walk with Him and do as He does. God's desire to be with His people, God's desire to be with you, is so strong that He bakes it into the fabric of the calendar. The life of the Israelite was to be punctuated with spaces of reconnection with God. However, as the author in Hebrews puts it, it didn't quite go that way for them. Hebrews 3 verse 10, therefore I, God, was provoked with that generation. And I said, they will always go astray in their heart. They have not known my ways, as I swore in my wrath. They shall not enter my rest. Because of sin within us, rather than desiring to be with God and walk with Him and do as He does, we instead desire to have our own way. At its root, sin says, I don't want to be with God. I want to be God. But if I am to be God, how can I stop working when there's so much to be done? And there's the issue. Because the observance of Sabbath rest requires our reliance and dependence on the God of rest. It requires a submission and a faith that trusts that His work is finished and final. The writer of Hebrews goes on to say that there remains now for us a Sabbath rest to enter into, a rest that the Israelites missed out on. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, for whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from His works, as God did from His. So where do we go to find this rest? Where do we find the Sabbath for our souls? Matthew 11 verse 28 says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus is our Sabbath rest. And in the same way that Jesus fulfills all of the law, Jesus fulfills the law of the Sabbath. Because the problem wasn't with the Sabbath laws. It's not that they're too strict. It's not that they're too burdensome. It's that the laws of the Sabbath and the structures of the calendar couldn't penetrate into our calloused hearts to give us true rest. And as it says in Romans 8, for God has done what the law weakened by flesh could not do. Now in this context, it's speaking about God bringing about righteousness within us. But in the same way that God has done what the law could not do, God has done what the law of the Sabbath could not do, weakened by the flesh. And God has given us rest in Jesus. Jesus is our gate to enter into God's Sabbath rest. At the onset of creation, God looked at all He had made and He said it's good, and He said it's finished, and then He rested. And in the same way, Jesus, on the day of preparation, as He was hanging on the cross, the night before the Sabbath, He cried out, it is finished. And so as Jesus dies and the work is finished, he ushers in for us a new Sabbath rest to be found in him. And so today, that same invitation stands. Come to me and I will give you rest. Jesus says, come be with me. Come walk with me. Come do as I do. He's invited us to take on his yoke. Now, a yoke was a type of harness used by oxen and other animals to ease the work of hauling a load. A common practice was to yoke a younger oxen with an older one, and as they pulled the load, initially the older oxen would be carrying the majority of the weight. But over time, as they walked together, the younger ox would learn from the older, placing an easy yoke on a young ox had nothing to do with the load. An easy yoke was a yoke that fit, one that didn't chafe on the calf's neck. Now, you may have been sitting here and listening to me, and you're thinking, that's all good and well. Jesus is my rest. Okay, great. But you don't know what's happening in my life. And you're quite right, I don't know. Some of you have loads that I couldn't imagine, that I know I definitely couldn't carry. But the invitation here is not for you to downsize on what God has planned for you. It's not even for you to stop working. It's not for you to pretend like we want to do as Christians sometimes. We want to post, God is good, eh? You know, on Instagram and wherever else you're going to post, the Lord is my shepherd, and I've got peace like a river. And meanwhile at home, you're wondering, your payday is far away. Right? But that's not what God's asking here. We acknowledge the load. But God is stronger. And so it requires us allowing him to put his yoke upon us, that we can be together. God joins you in the work. In Luke 10, let me find it here. In Luke 10, there's a story, Luke 10 verse 38. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him to her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to then help me. But Jesus answered her, Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her. For a lot of you, the thing causing the load is your service to God. It's, God, I want to help. God, I'm going to serve in church. There's so many people that need me. But the thing that God needs from you is to be with him. That's his invitation. And it's been the invitation all the way through. That's why he sent Jesus, so that he could be with you. And so that invitation is still here this morning, to be with Jesus. Now, there's a lot of things we could consider about how to make that happen. We could look at active and passive rest. We could look at meditation and contemplative prayer. You can consider whether the Sabbath should be on a Sunday or a Saturday. But let's not get distracted this morning and overthink it. Because when others in the world around you look at your life, the peculiarity for them to see is not that you don't take Sunday shifts because I observe the Sabbath. The peculiarity is in the perpetual rhythm of refreshment that you walk in. In Acts 4, it says, now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were uneducated, common men, and they were astonished. They recognized that they had been with Jesus. There's something peculiar, there's something strange, there's something weird about people who've been with Jesus. You can see it in the way that they walk. You can see it in their life, that these people have been with Jesus. And He opens that invitation to us. But it takes us submitting to Him to do the work that He needs to do. In 1 Peter 5, verse 6, it says, "Submit then yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that at the right time He may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on Him because He cares for you." We like the casting anxieties part, but it comes after a submission. Because for me to say, to enter rest, I can only rest when the work is finished, which means submitting to the finished work of Jesus. And so when we're casting our anxieties in, the reason I'm not anxious is not because there's nothing going on in my life. It's not because my problems are small. It's because I know that I'm under the mighty hand of Jesus. And so the Sabbath isn't a burden. It's not another thing to put on your list of the things that you need to do. It's an invitation.